Before you walk into a military recruiter's office and sign that dotted line, I need you to pause. Like I always say, I've been in the Air Force for 19 years and I was a recruiter at one point. And the majority of the applicants that I put into the Air Force, they loved their choice. But I've also seen people regret it because they didn't understand what they were getting themselves into. And for somebody like me who loves being in the military, I also understand that it's not for everyone. So there are a few key things that you should know before you walk into a recruiter's office, because once you do and you ship off to basic training, there's no turning back. So today I'm going to be breaking down 6 things that you should be asking yourself before you walk into a recruiter's office. First thing I want to talk about is a girl who I put in back in 2017, I think. She came into the office and she came with her dad. Anybody who's tried to join the military before they know, you sit down with the recruiter, they're going to ask you a lot of questions about why you're joining and try to figure out if they have something for you and if you're a good fit for the Air Force. So I'm asking this girl all these questions and her dad keeps responding to all the questions that I'm asking. So I'm asking like, what do you want to join for? And her dad say, oh, she wants to join because she wants to get her education. So I'm like, okay, that's weird, but this happens a lot, believe it or not. But in this case, the girl wasn't really saying anything. Her dad pretty much hijacked the conversation, but she was extra qualified to join. So I've seen this before with other applicants. They didn't really say too much, but they wanted to join. So I ended up getting her in the Air Force, but 3 weeks into the Air Force, I get a call from her dad and he says that, hey, my daughter is coming back home. He said that while she was in basic training, she said that she can't do this and this was never something that she wanted to do. And he said, what happened? Like, why would she say that? And I told him, I was honest with him. I was like, I don't think she was joining for herself. I think she was joining for you. So everyone should be asking themselves, why are you joining? And if it's because of some external factor, maybe like your parents or you're feeling like you're pressured, then it might not be a good fit for you. Now, that being said, I've seen people join because of their parents, or I've seen people join because of pressure and they did well. But there was a study that was done, a RAND study, R-A-N-D. And basically they were asking people in the military, like why they joined. And they discovered that people who joined because of external factors did not usually re-enlist. There was no retention for them. So although they may be able to get through their first enlistment, they don't usually do a second or a third. And that's because they had no self-motivation to want to do this from the beginning. So I always tell people, if nobody cared, if nobody was watching you, would you still do this? And if the answer is no, you might want to reconsider. Second thing I want to talk about, there was a study done by some doctors for the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery, I believe. And they discovered that many of the people who are joining the military today have the bone density of people twice their age. That means that this generation is not getting up and going outside. They're sitting around, most of them sitting around playing video games, scrolling on their phone, just not being active and physical anymore. And then another study showed in 2022 by the CDC that half of the people ages 18 to 25 do not do 30 minutes of exercise a day, let alone in a week. And for the military, that's bad news because the DoD determined that 70% of the young people who we need to qualify for the military can't because of physical stuff and health reasons. So the 30% who can, they keep telling themselves, oh, you know, I'll work out when I get into basic training. And so what's happening is that these people are going to basic training and they're having all kind of issues. They're having stress fractures, they're having injuries and all kind of medical issues that's getting them medically discharged before their career even starts. And for the ones that don't, they're getting recycled back a week or two so they can pass their PT test. So you got to ask yourself, are you willing to do PT? Are you willing to do it before you join? Stop saying that, you know, I'm going to do it next week. I'm going to do it next week. And then next thing you know, you find yourself in basic training and you haven't done it. And then once you graduate basic training, are you willing to continue doing PT? Because what we're seeing is that a lot of the young people who join very quickly after they graduate basic training in tech school, they fall out of shape and they have a hard time passing their PT. So are you willing to do PT? And I'm serious, like, are you willing to do fitness? Basic training is not gentle. I know a lot of people like to think that the Air Force has the most gentle basic training, but even in the Air Force, they're going to push you. I know y'all are thinking that their job is to get you into shape, but they can't get you into shape if you don't even have a shape to build. But they're going to try, and it's going to either be easy or it's going to be hard. But one way or the other, they're going to try to get you into shape. So don't make it hard on yourself. yourself. I always tell people to start running, start doing push-ups, start doing sit-ups, because those are the basic workouts that you have to do when you get into the military. Start light, start slow. Don't do too much. Just do enough to start getting yourself in shape. Third thing I want to talk about, when I was a recruiter back in Iowa, one of the main things I saw was prior service people, meaning that they used to serve in the military branch, coming back into my office and telling me that they regret their decision. And I say, you know, what happened? Why do you regret your decision? They said, you know, I was just tired of the military. I did a 4-year or I did a 6-year contract. I got back out into the civilian world and got smacked in the face with reality that I probably should have stayed in. So here's something no recruiter will probably tell you. Transitioning back into the civilian life out of the military is not easy. There was a Pew study done, and it said that 44% of people transitioning back into the civilian world have a hard time. And it's mainly because people who join do not have a plan for when they get out. So you need to be asking yourself, what benefits are you going to take advantage of? So that way, when you transition back into the civilian world, you're not going to end up like a statistic and not have yourself set up for your civilian life. So are you going to use your tuition assistance and get a degree? Are you going to take advantage of the post 9/11 GI Bill? Are you going to get any certifications for the career that you're doing so you can use them in a civilian world? Are you saving enough money? Do you have an emergency fund so you can transition back into the civilian world and not land flat on your face? If you don't have an answer to those questions, then you should start planning now. I'm talking about before you actually join. You should start planning your 4 or 6 year plan, so that way if you don't decide to stay in the military, that you can transition back into the civilian world. The fourth thing I want to talk about, and this one is super important. When I was joining back in 2006, I was in a delayed entry program and I got pulled over and they gave me a ticket for driving with no insurance. They told me that it was super simple, that all I had to do was provide proof of my insurance to the court and they would drop everything. So I did that and I thought it was super simple, super easy. There was no reason to mention it to my recruiter. I get in the Air Force, and while I'm in tech school, I had somebody come to my classroom with a badge and he was saying, hey, you didn't mention to your recruiter about this driving with no insurance ticket on this date. And I was like, oh snap, like I didn't think it was important to do that. So that decision almost cost me my whole Air Force career. They had me in this thing that they called admin hold, and they were trying to figure out what they were going to do with me. The only reason why they let me stay in the Air Force was because I got top grad or distinguished grad in my tech school. That's the only reason why they let me stay. Even though it was something super small and minor, it looked like I was hiding something from the military. So what I'm saying is, if you're lying about something, most likely they're going to find it, whether they find it at MEPS or whether they find it while you're actually serving. You do not want to get caught lying because they can get you for erroneous enlistment. And the majority of the time when something like this happens is when people are trying to get top secret jobs. So what happens when you go to basic training? If you have a top secret job, they're going to sit you down and they're going to ask you a bunch of questions and scare you, shake you up and say that we're going to find out. And that's when people start mentioning things that they did not tell their recruiter. Not only does this not get them the top secret job, but this gets a lot of people kicked out of the military entirely. So my biggest advice is ask yourself and don't underestimate how deep the military will go to find out. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just letting you know that your past can and will catch up to you. All right, the fifth thing I want to talk about. When I joined the Air Force almost 20 years ago, I was going to sleep probably like 2:30 in the morning, 3:30 in the morning, out partying. When I joined, we were waking up at 4:30 in the morning. We were waking up at the time that I was going to sleep in my civilian life. What I realized in basic training is that my schedule was never my own. It was always the TIs, the training instructor. He basically detailed what we were going to be doing throughout every minute of the day. And going from like a careless type of lifestyle to this structure, that was very difficult on me. After basic training, after tech school, things start to ease up, but it's still not like your normal average 9 to 5. When I was in maintenance, I was going to work at 6 o'clock in the morning and we were leaving at about 2:30. So it was about an 8.5 hour day. So that's pretty easy. But then they would call us and tell us we had to come back, or maybe on the weekends, they would tell us we had to come in, and we had all kind of drills that we had to do. Like we had to act like it was a hurricane, and we had to act like we were getting biologically or chemically attacked. We had to do all kind of different things that you don't normally do in a 9 to 5. I remember one time my wife and I, we had a plan to go to Disney World for the weekend. I didn't take leave or anything for it because it was only 6 hours away. I was like, you know, we're gonna go to Disney World and then come back. We had everything planned and I went to work that Friday. And that Friday morning, they told us that we're gonna have to work weekend. I had a hotel reserved, I had everything planned, and I had to call my wife and let her know that we're not going to Disney World this weekend. And my wife was like, what do you mean we're not going to Disney World? Like, you need to let them know that you had a trip planned to Disney World. And I'm like, it don't work like that, baby. I can't just say, sorry, y'all, I can't come in. I'm going to Disney World. So you got to ask yourself, are you willing to work in a work environment like that? So at that moment, this was definitely a bad thing that happened in my life. But there was some studies showing that people who actually go through like a rigid structure usually fare better in life. So of course, at the moment, this felt like a bad thing, but on a positive note, they say that young adults who experience some type of like rigid structure early in their life usually become more disciplined, they become more resilient and confident. So I definitely didn't love all the moments like that happened to me throughout my career, but I will say that it made me who I am. So you got to ask yourself, are you willing to put up with this rigid, structured environment and this abnormal 9-to-5 kind of job? And then the last thing I wanted to talk about, and this is critical. Before I joined the Air Force, I think I had like 18 jobs, y'all. Like I ain't lying. And the reason why is because I didn't like a lot of the job. I used to work so many different jobs. And one thing about me back then was that if I didn't like the job, I was on to my next one. When y'all sign a military contract, it ain't no, oh, I don't like it, I'm going on to the next job. You are locked in for the next 4 or 6 years of however long you sign your enlistment. Like if you're working at like McDonald's and your manager pisses you off for the day, you can just quit. You can quit and say, you know what, I've had it. In the military, it ain't working like that. If your manager pisses you off, you gotta suck that up and show back up the next day and continue moving until that contract is either up or until that manager gets stationed somewhere else. And if you do decide that you're just gonna walk away or quit, they got this thing called AWOL. It's called like absent without leave. And it's not like leaving your job at like Starbucks and saying, hey, you just go missing and nobody can find you. This is actually a federal crime, and this is gonna stick with you everywhere you go afterward. So you gotta ask yourself, are you really willing to give the next 4 to 6 years? It's not really bad, I'll be honest with y'all. Like them 4 to 6 years, it feels like a lot at the beginning, but I want y'all to think back to your high school. When you were a freshman in high school and you thought the next 4 years are gonna be forever. And then the next thing you know, it's senior year and you're like, whoa, it was all a blur. It feels like that in the military as well, but it's still 4 or 6 years. So you gotta ask yourself, are you willing to give them that time? I'm not trying to scare anybody. I just want y'all to think this through, because I've seen too many people join and they didn't think these things through. They ended up hating their lives, or they ended up hating their experience. And then they're the ones going on like Reddit and Facebook and all of that, talking trash about the military because they didn't really know what they was getting themselves into. So I'm trying to avoid that for you all. But if you've asked yourself these questions and you feel solid about your answers and still trying to move forward in the process, there's one thing that I've seen that blocks a lot of people from joining, and it's the damn ASVAB test. I mean, a lot of people are not getting in the military because of this test. So if you're joining and you don't really know what this test is, or you're struggling with this test, I got a video on the screen right now that'll break down everything about this test for you to hopefully help you get into the military one day. But like I always say, I hope this video brought value to y'all. Stay beautiful, stay classy, and until next time, check me out.